Hello, everyone, and welcome. I can still see people are trying to log on, still coming in, but we'll get started anyway, because I know this is potentially people's break during the day. Although I can see from the names of people coming in, people from all over the place. So thank you very much for joining us wherever you are. My name is Alison Castle-Kane. I work for Trinity College London as the Head of Business Development for the UK and Ireland. And I am delighted to welcome you to this session on Discover Trinity TESOL. This session is going to be delivered by Simon Cox. Simon is a member of our academic support team, and he has quite a long history of experience in TESOL, spanning over 30 years, has worked in many, many different countries around the world as a teacher, as a trainer, and in management as well. He's worked in the UK, Hungary, Azerbaijan, Thailand, India, Vietnam, and China, quite a number of years in China as well. Currently, he is an assessor and a consultant for a number of different courses delivered by Trinity College London, and that includes the Certificate in Practicing Teachers and the DIP TESOL, the Diploma in TESOL. So it is an absolute pleasure to introduce you to Simon. Today's session is going to give you an overview of all of Trinity's TESOL qualifications, but a specific focus on the initial certificate, the Cert TESOL, as well as the Certificate in Practicing Teachers. And then we're going to touch on a little bit about, where can a teaching qualification take you in the world. So I'm going to hand over to Simon now, and I would ask if you do have questions, if you could please put them in the Q&A, and I will join Simon near the end, and we'll take some of your questions and answer them live. Okay, over to you, Simon.
Hello. Oh, great. Thanks very much, Alison. It's really nice to see so many people here already. So I'm going to start sharing my screen in a minute so that you can see a little bit more about what I'm going to be talking about. Before I do go to the slides, though, I just wanted to say, first of all, that probably now is a really good time to get involved in English language teaching. At the moment, schools around the world are desperate. They really need more teachers at both the beginning of their careers and also more experienced teachers as well. So if you're interested in a career in English language teaching, now's a good time to start. So back to the screen, back to the slides. I hope you can see those are okay. So this is what we're going to talk about today. As Alison said, we're going to focus on the whole range of Trinity's qualifications, but we're also going to focus a little bit more on a couple of them because maybe they're the most maybe immediately useful ones for most people. Just one thing to say at the beginning, like many professions, many careers, English language teaching uses quite a lot of different acronyms. So even on this page, you can see we see the word TESOL, but you're all maybe already familiar with ELT or ESL or something like that. At least for now, let's just say that all of those things are related to English language teaching. And then maybe as we go through, maybe we'll see that we can use those terms a little differently in different situations. Okay, so first thing, I suppose, is a brief background of who Trinity College London actually are. As you can see, the organization itself is 150 years old. And an interesting issue is the idea that it started and continues with a focus on music. And maybe some people would think, well, why is music and language teaching a good relationship? And I'd say that there are probably two most important reasons that I've noticed. The first one, the first more obvious one, I suppose, is that all of the Trinity English language teaching courses that we're focusing on, they tend to have a real focus on pronunciation work. That's probably one of the things that all of these courses is different from any of the other courses that you may come across. So that's one area. But the second one, I think, is the idea that if you're testing people's musical ability, then right from the beginning, Trinity has been very focused on skills, on testing a skill rather than just somebody's knowledge. And I think we'll discover that that's really clear when you look at the way that we use certain kinds of tasks and assessments in teacher development. And you'll probably see some examples of this later on. But this means that kind of all of these qualifications become very, very practical, because all of the assessment that we use is exactly based on what you need in real life and real teaching, which I think is a really important aspect of what Trinity do. So here's a kind of a quick overview of the qualifications that we're talking about today. I think a couple of things might be quite useful to talk about at this point. The first thing is this idea of RQF levels that you can see in the middle. So this is a system that we use in the UK, although it's quite similar in other countries as well, where we can compare professional or vocational qualifications with maybe more traditional academic qualifications. So, for example, level 5, as you can see here, it kind of relates to something around the level of a degree level. It's not exactly a bachelor's degree, but it's something like that. Whereas you can see level 7 is referring to something that has the kind of level of difficulty, the level of amount of study time that's similar to a master's degree. So if you're not familiar with these levels, maybe that's something to bear in mind. Another thing that's interesting to start off with is that some of these qualifications are created for people who have never been a teacher before. And we could call those pre-service qualifications, before you become a teacher. But some of the others are in-service qualifications. So those are for people who already have experience as a teacher and are looking to develop their skills and develop their qualifications as their career progresses. Okay, so as an overview, although I'm going to come back to this one in a little bit more detail later. So perhaps this is, let's say, the most common of the qualifications, the Cert TESOL. So it's a certificate level qualification. And as I've already mentioned, this is the one that's most often used by people who've never been a teacher before. It's a pre-service qualification. As you can see, it's a 130-hour course, which means that for most people, very often in the past at least, this is a kind of 4 to 5 week, very intensive course, although it doesn't always have to be delivered that way. Although I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes, a key feature of this is, number one, that this gives the new teacher opportunity to practice in the classroom with real students. And that's kind of an important thing. But another issue is the thing that's mentioned at the bottom of this slide, the idea of an unknown language. So this is something where we're going to encourage all of the candidates, the people who are the trainee teachers, they're going to learn a language that they've never learned before. So, for example, in my own experience, when I took this course 30 years ago, I was learning Croatian language. For different courses, it could be a completely different language. I know when I'm delivering this course, I generally use I use Thai, for example. So we focus on different languages depending on the different people that are involved in the course. So that's Cert TESOL. I'll come back to it again in a little bit, and we'll look at it in a little bit more detail. So, as I mentioned, Cert TESOL is often is a kind of pre-service qualification. But once you've got that certificate and you actually start teaching, most people quite quickly realize that they need to develop their skills in different ways. Often we develop those skills because of specialist requirements in different places. And probably worldwide, the most important requirement around the world is the focus on young learners, on children, because that's a special area that maybe we don't spend very much time thinking about on Cert TESOL, because that's all going to be focusing on adults. So the Tilek, as we call it, the Teaching Young Learner Extension Certificate, Tilek, is really used as a kind of follow on from Cert TESOL in most places. And it focuses very specifically on teaching younger learners. In the same way, in the modern world, I guess we could say, another specialization that many people are facing nowadays is the idea of online teaching. And so there is a course, which of course is managed online, where teachers can study in their own time the aspects of online teaching, including familiarization with kind of digital resources that we could be using online, even to the point of using Zoom and PowerPoint in an online classroom environment, kind of a little bit like I'm doing right now. Also, an interesting part of this online teaching is that you can get a certificate, which is kind of an add-on. And a lot of teachers who are already working for a school, for example, find this qualification is really useful to show an employer that I have experience and knowledge and the skills that I need for working both face-to-face in a classroom with students, but also in the online environment, which, especially post-COVID, more and more of us are using more of the time. Another qualification that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail is a really interesting kind of unique qualification, I would say, that I've never seen any other organization trying to run, the CertPT, or the Certificate for Practicing Teachers. So again, this is an in-service qualification. It's designed for people who already have experience as a teacher. But maybe even just a quick look at it allows you to see that it's also designed for people that probably don't have English as their first language, but are teaching English as a foreign language or as a second language to their students. So to give you an idea, from my experience, I've used this certificate quite a lot in China. And there we have a situation where experienced Chinese teachers are teaching Chinese students in many different situations. They may have been doing this for a long time. They've probably got a lot of experience, but they're looking for some professional development, maybe some specialization in their teaching. And they do this by taking this course with some very interesting practical tasks that allow them to really get into the deeper parts of their teaching. It focuses on materials. So, for example, if you've got a course book, the idea is looking at the course book and thinking about how it's designed and how it could be used differently, better perhaps. And one of the really interesting aspects of this particular course is that it's a bilingual course. Again, I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes, but the basic idea here is that just because somebody is a good teacher of English in their local environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that their level of English is really, really high academically to be able to write perhaps an academic essay at a very high level. So those two things aren't always the same. So one of the great things about CertPT is, as I discovered in China, that the teachers are able to write their essays in their native language. So in this case, Mandarin Chinese. So they're using Mandarin Chinese for their writing, academic writing, but they're also using English in the classroom and English materials for their teaching. So there's a really interesting and I think very modern use of kind of bilingualism, which is really, really interesting, and I hope it appeals to more people. So as Alison mentioned at the beginning, so this is the course that I spent most of my time working on. It's the Diploma in Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, or the DIP, as we often call it. So as I mentioned earlier on, as a level 7 qualification, this is something that is kind of for very experienced teachers, usually 2 years of work teaching or more after the certificate level, who are perhaps looking to go further in their careers, maybe taking on a new role or a new challenge in teaching by becoming a manager or a materials writer or perhaps a trainer or something like that. And it's a very challenging course. And it's quite a long course as well. So you can see that although it says 150 hours, for most people who take this course, they're going to be taking hundreds of hours in researching, in writing essays, in preparing lesson plans, etc., etc. So this course is usually run over a longer period of time. Some people can run it in 8 weeks or so, but generally we see that most people would take about 6 months to take this course. One of the reasons that's the case is because this is really designed for in-service teachers, which means that the teachers are probably working at the same time as they're studying. So that's why a lot of people think it's better to do it over a longer period of time. There are some very interesting aspects of this particular course. Again, it's another Trinity course, so there's a very big focus on pronunciation work. And well, anybody who's ever taken the DIP TESOL can tell you that by the end of the course, they're very confident in being aware of how pronunciation, how phonology works in English. As I said, it's a challenging course, and challenging perhaps in 2 different ways. The first way that it's challenging is just that it's a lot of hard work. That's one way that it's challenging. But the second way, I guess, is to say that the purpose of this course is to introduce new ideas, to get the teacher to think about ways of teaching and learning that they never thought about before. So that's why it doesn't really matter just how much experience you have. We're always going to say, try a new way, try something new. How do you do that differently, or how do you do that better? So even experienced teachers can find the DIP TESOL a very challenging course. Okay, so going back to this, the same chart that I used at the beginning. So one of the things you can see at the bottom there, so the DIP TESOL, we're talking about 600 hours of study. That's a long time. So if you imagine how many hours of study per week you can manage, it often makes sense to do it over quite a long period of time. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to focus a little bit more on the Cert TESOL. So as I mentioned, this is an initial, we've used the word essential here. For most teachers, this is the starting point of their career. Okay, So what's special, what's different about the Cert TESOL? Well, we've got here kind of an idea about what's included in the course. These are the things that you should be able to, that these are the targets, the aims that you should have completed by the end of the course. And I guess the key point in this particular frame is the idea of expert trainers. So on a Cert TESOL course, whether it's the first time you've been a teacher or you've had some experience before, the trainer will be working very hard to develop your teaching skills. That's a really important focus all the way through this course. And so you'll be doing lots of teaching practice. And as you do it, every time, every day, the tutors will be giving you feedback, and probably just as importantly, they'll be encouraging you as the trainee teacher to reflect, to think about what you're doing, thinking about your experiences, thinking about how you can improve it for yourself. Another issue would be the idea of what English is. Now maybe English is your native language. Maybe you've spoken English all your life. But even if that's the case, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're immediately going to be able to teach it, because you may not be very aware of rules and patterns and structures and all of those kind of things, or the terminology that maybe a lot of learners already know, that maybe as a native speaker, you don't know. So this is, without going too much into detail about discussions about the backgrounds of people, courses like Cert TESOL are equally useful for people who are both a native speaker of a language or somebody who's been learning English for a long time and reached a high level of competence. All people can gain something from something like a Cert TESOL. Okay, so let's look at it in a bit more detail. So as I've already mentioned, kind of like, and you can see in this picture here, the heart, the key element of a Cert TESOL program is the teaching practice. Why? Well, because that's it. You're going to learn how to be a teacher. You need to have this experience. 6 hours is actually quite a lot of teaching practice over a 4 or 5 week period. In most centres, this is probably going to be 8 or 9 lessons. And as I said, every time you're going to prepare that lesson, you're going to teach it with a group of real students. You're going to discuss it, you're going to get feedback on it, and every time we hope that you're going to make some progress with your teaching. It's also a really important issue to consider because as an employer around the world, this part is the part that most employers are most interested in. They want to know that you've had real experience in a classroom. And so if you're looking online at different kinds of, sometimes they're called TEFL courses, certificate level courses for new teachers, please be really careful to check that it has 6 hours of observed teaching in it. Because if it doesn't, there's a good possibility that a lot of employers around the world won't be interested. They won't recognize your certificate. So not all courses actually have this part included in it. So it's always something to check on. Let's see, another thing that's important in here. So here we're beginning to see some of these tasks that are really useful, that Trinity is very good at. So one of them is the idea of kind of focusing on one individual person, one individual learner, and thinking about their background, their motivations, their needs, so that we begin to be a kind of empathetic with what the needs of different learners might be. Very, very interesting assessment, that one. But another one is the idea of creating your own materials. All teachers need to be able to do this. Yes, we can sometimes take something out of a course book, but a good teacher, a useful teacher, maybe a creative teacher, is a person that can take something from around them, whether that's something from YouTube or from a newspaper or whatever, and create something that they can use in a classroom. It's quite an important part of the process. And finally, and often most entertainingly, I would say, we have the unknown foreign language lesson. So this is, as I mentioned right at the beginning, where the group of teachers learn a foreign language that they have never learned before. So they're not going to learn it for very long. So we're only going to be learning it for a couple of hours usually. But the idea is that over that period, even by learning just a few words or a few grammatical structures or something like that, you're reminded, or maybe for the first time ever, I don't know, of the experience of what it's like to be a foreign language learner. And then you write an assignment around it. So actually, I hope you can see that with the Cert TESOL, the assignments, the activities that you do on the course are actually really interesting. I have to say, I did mine 30 years ago, and I still remember some of the things that I did on that course really, really clearly. So I can see quite a lot of questions are coming up. So I'm going to make sure that we've got plenty of time to answer them. So keep adding them. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much more about Cert TESOL. Here's the basic idea. Another thing that to mention is the idea that nowadays, especially after COVID, a lot of providers are doing it either online or blended, which means that there's a combination of face-to-face and online study. Different providers will do this in different ways, so I'll talk about that a little bit later on. As I've already mentioned, there's this idea that you really need those 6 hours of teaching practice. But another thing that makes this, the Trinity Cert TESOL really important, really useful, is the idea that it's externally assessed. And that's something that's kind of important because it means that this course should have the same level of quality every place you study. So it doesn't matter if you take this course in Hong Kong or in London or in Buenos Aires, the quality, the certificate that you get should have the same meaning, the same quality at the end of it. So after you've got your Cert TESOL, I've already mentioned, you've got lots of different choices about where you go next in your career. You could work as, we could call them a general English teacher, which just means the idea of teaching English to a large groups of people with general overall need to develop their English skills. And you could do that in the UK in some cases, especially if you're a UK citizen, or in your own country, or you can travel to other countries. Nowadays, you could be doing that either working as a freelancer, maybe online, for example, or you could get employment in a school. And as I've already mentioned, if you want to get employment in a school as an English language teacher, then Cert TESOL is probably the key thing that you need to get at the beginning of your career. And then after that, you can begin to specialize. I'm talking about some of those different qualifications now. And as you begin to move up the the career ladder, maybe you could move into DIP TESOL or something like that at the same time, or as an alternative to a master's degree. So we'll come back to that at the end a little. So no, but I just wanted to focus on another qualification, this CertPT, which I mentioned before. So as I've already mentioned, hope you can remember this a little bit. So CPD, another one of these ELT acronyms, is about continuous professional development. And so you'll know this if you're already a teacher, but nearly all schools, will expect you to continually develop your skills as a teacher. So you finish your Cert TESOL, but the school isn't going to let you stop there. You're always going to need to develop your skills. And one interesting way to do this is through specialization. We've got some examples here. So we can see this idea of CLIL, C-L-I-L. So CLIL is content and language integrated learning. It's a complex issue, but basically this is about the idea of using English at the same time as you have, we could say, the school subjects that you would normally learn at school, say, I don't know, history and mathematics and physics and chemistry and geography. Can you learn those things at the same time? They are integrated. So this is often used with state schools or international schools, and also maybe university level. So it's a very specific, really interesting area. Another area that's really important for a lot of people around the world is the idea of exam preparation. So almost every country in the world, there's an interest in the famous international exams that allow people perhaps to study in a different country. So you may be familiar with courses like examinations like IELTS or the Trinity examinations or TOEFL. But very often they are the teachers who prepare people for those exams, they have some specialist training. So again, this is part of CPD or EAP, English for academic purposes. So once students get to the university in the USA or Australia, for example, then often they're going to need support in their English language use as they study for their degree or their master's degree or whatever. And that's another specialist area for the English language teacher. And the joy of the CertPT is the idea that it does this by focusing on the materials that we use, on the resources. And so there are 4 assignments, 4 tasks for CertPT. The first one asks us to critique, to look at the materials that we're already using and think about why are they designed this way, who are they designed for, maybe what's good about them, maybe what could be better. And then the second task looks at adapting some of those resources, thinking about ways I could do them better for my specific group of learners. And then a third one is about creating something new. So a really nice creative process. And then finally, the fourth one is kind of much more of a reflection on the process. So asking the learners, asking colleagues, asking your boss, which was successful, which was less successful, what kind of things should we be trying to do when we're creating materials. So another example of the practical, useful aspects of these Trinity qualifications. This is just kind of an overview of the way CertPT looks. Really a summary of the things that I just mentioned. And here's a little bit more information about the actual CertPT qualification. So as you can see, and I mentioned this already, this is for in-service teachers, not necessarily a lot of experience, but for some experience, especially if you've already done Cert TESOL, but 6 months later, maybe you could begin to think about this one. Again, this is a course that's sometimes managed online, sometimes it's done face-to-face, and that changes the course a little bit. But overall, it's around 100 hours of study for most people. Because this is an in-service course, you can see that it's used in a slightly different way from the Cert TESOL that I mentioned before. But because it's not for somebody at the beginning of their career, but somebody that's already got their career development going. The important things to talk about, I guess, are it's really useful if you're moving into a new area of language teaching. So, for example, if you're moving from the state school system into the university system, that could be a really interesting kind of idea to use this qualification to help you do that. Another one is the relationship between something like the CertPT and a master's degree. So depending where you are in the world, the CertPT can be used as part of an application for a master's degree program. Sometimes in some places, it allows you to reduce the number of credit units that you need to take on a master's degree program. So that varies, but you can find more information about that on Trinity's website. Okay, so that's quite a quick survey of some of these the qualifications that are available, and probably anybody who's interested in these things, you're going to have to do a little bit more research to find out for yourself. And so the last part really is just to give you some ideas of where to look. The first website that I'm including here is Trinity's own website. And this is a course finder website. So this allows you to find a Cert TESOL course in different places around the world. It's got a nice little map, and you can click on and find the providers. And then you can contact them directly and find out when courses are going to be run and those kind of things. Bear in mind, as I mentioned before, that although they're being run in different countries, and they're being run by different people in different ways, the qualification, the certificate that you get, has the same value wherever you take the qualification. So don't forget about that. So you've taken your Cert TESOL, let's assume, let's imagine, but then you need to start looking for work. You need to find a job. Where would be a good place to look? Well, if you're looking online, an interesting place to start is the TEFL.com, TEFL.com, probably the largest website with the greatest number of vacancies around the world. And it'll give you an idea. So if nothing else, I would suggest look at it. You may need to register, but it can give you an idea of kind of like the different kinds of jobs that are out there and the terms and conditions that people have in different places. The second one, ESL Cafe, it does a similar kind of thing. So they're both worth looking at. As you're searching, you might find sometimes the use of the terms TEFL I and TEFL Q. So the I means initial qualification or the basic qualification. So Cert TESOL, as I mentioned before, for example, is TEFL I because it means you don't have very much experience as a teacher yet. Whereas TEFL Q is TEFL qualified, and that's used to describe teachers who've got more experience. And so, for example, if you take the diploma, DIP TESOL, then that would count as TEFL Q. So other places that you could find a new job. Well, I spent a lot of time working for International House around the world. And one of the key issues I always thought is very important about International House is their commitment to professional development. So people often ask me, can I give you advice on finding a job, especially at the beginning of your career? I would say that although it's an exciting adventure out there, it's a good idea, if possible, to try to find a school that will support you at the beginning of your career and perhaps help you find professional development routes as you become more experienced. And on the whole, IH schools are very good at that. So have a look at their website. The same is true of the British Council as well. And again, they're recruiting around the world, lots of different people. So, and it's another opportunity to look and see if there's a job for you there. Although you should need to bear in mind with the British Council that they're less likely to recruit inexperienced teachers in many countries. They're often only interested in recruiting more experienced teachers. But you should find information on their website anyway. So, the career pathways for TESOL. So I think you probably already got an idea from what I've been talking about, that there are lots and lots of different options. It's, as I just mentioned, it's an adventure. And I know my 30 years as a teacher and a trainer and an assessor have been an adventure. And it hasn't always led me where I thought it was going to go. So that's why I've just included 3 things here at the bottom for us to think about, just in a couple of minutes. The first one is locations. So many of you may decide that you want to stay in your home country to work, and that's wonderful. There are lots of different ways that can go. Some of you may decide that you want to travel abroad. And you may already have an idea in your head where you want to go to, which is also wonderful. There are opportunities in almost all countries around the world. If you want to travel and you haven't really decided where you want to go yet, then my recommendation here is to be maybe a little bit more open-minded. One of the reasons I say that is because there are some countries that many people want to visit, want to work in. And often those are the countries where maybe always the conditions for working are not always great because they have a supply of more teachers. Sometimes it's quite interesting to decide to go somewhere that maybe other people don't want to go, because you can have a more interesting experience, a more supportive experience with the schools who try harder to support you. Say, for example, a lot of people want to go to Spain, but what about Lithuania, for example? I went to Lithuania and I had a really interesting, great time, and I learned a lot as a teacher there as well. So, you know, it's good to be open-minded about different places that you travel to. The second thing is different organizations. So different organizations are likely to focus you in different areas of specialization. Especially at the beginning of your career, I'd suggest it's really interesting to try and get as much different experience as possible. So I was very lucky when I first started teaching that within 2 or 3 years, I'd had experience of working with young learners, actually kindergarten, very young learners. But I'd also had the experience of working in a what we would call an ESP, a kind of business environment, where I was working with airline pilots, helping them pass exams. So that experience was really interesting and varied, and it was a great opportunity that I'm very glad that I had. And finally, the roles as well. So teaching can lead in lots of different directions. So maybe you wouldn't have imagined at first. So I didn't know when I first started my career that I was going to spend so much time focusing on management, for example. And that's something that I focus on a lot now. I write about it, I do conference presentations, and it's something that I wouldn't have expected at the beginning. But there are obviously qualifications and experience to be had with, sorry about that, it was just telling me that, sorry about that, that there are lots of experiences out there and roles that maybe we haven't really imagined yet. And one of the really interesting one is if you're creative and if you're technologically aware, the design and the use of digital tools for teaching is a really important and developing area that probably a lot of people are going to focus on in the future. So that's my overview, but now I can see that there are quite a lot of questions, so it's time to have a look at some of those.
That was brilliant, Simon. Thank you so much. It was really, really clear, and I'm sure everybody found that really helpful, just to get, you know, just the clarity of everything in terms of what each qualification entails, and then some brilliant ideas for getting started and you know, the decisions that you're making. We do have a whole slew of questions here. The first one, because I've had a quick look through the different questions, but the first thing I just want to clarify is that, and I'm going to put a link in the chat here now. So Trinity College London, we oversee and moderate the courses that are run by validated course providers. So if you have an interest in any of our qualifications, you do need to go online and find a provider that is either close to you or a provider that maybe is delivering online. They're all listed there in terms of depending on the qualifications. So you do need to go and find a particular provider to work with. I do just want to clarify that we don't offer the courses directly. So we work with organizations who deliver the qualifications, and then we oversee and moderate that work. So I did just want to make that clear from the beginning. Simon, I'll go through some of these kind of one by one if you're happy to work with me and answer. I suspect many of them are going to be for you, but I'll do my best to chirp in too.
Okay, let's go.
So someone completed their Trinity Cert TESOL earlier this year and finding it difficult to secure work in the UK due to lack of experience. They don't come with a teaching background, and this is their first teaching qualification. Do you have any advice? I have some advice, but I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I mean, I know that a lot of schools in the UK are looking to recruit at the moment, so I don't know. I mean, like maybe you could give some practical advice on how they can.
Well, I was surprised to read it, Fiona, as the first question, because I thought the schools here in the UK are absolutely desperate for staff. Now, obviously, more staff are required at peak time, so from kind of Easter onwards, and I don't know when you were looking, but I would certainly go to the English UK website and look at the member schools and start to contact some of those schools. You may also find it useful to, because you've done a Trinity Cert, to actually go to the schools that offer Trinity Cert. And there, again, if you go under the Trinity Cert TESOL Find a Course webpage, you can see all the providers in the UK that might be of interest. I know many schools who run the cert are very keen to kind of take some of their students and immediately join their teaching staff. And we hear that all the time. So that might be a few ideas, but I'm sure you know, you will quickly find a solution. If you do have any you know, need any further assistance, do feel free to contact us at Trinity and we can try and point you in the right direction too. Okay. Now, the next question is about synchronous and asynchronous learning, particularly with the Cert TESOL. So this is someone who is in the Ukraine and obviously having difficulties with connectivity, power. Simon, I don't know if you know too much about the way the cert is delivered with other providers, but if you have any comments on that. I know there will be elements that are asynchronous, but it's going to be a combination. Would you?
Yeah, so I mean, I saw that point as well. And of course, you know, that the situation for people in Ukraine at the moment is very challenging, very difficult for them. A simple answer really is that yes, there are courses that are both synchronous and asynchronous, so you can do some study in your own time when you've got access. The problem at the moment would be that the synchronous part is usually the teaching practice part, and because of getting all of the students together, it kind of needs to be done at a regular time, at a predictable time. And that's maybe going to make that quite challenging for your situation at the moment, because it's going to be difficult to predict when you can get online. So I'd suggest that at least maybe for now, maybe Cert TESOL might not be such a great idea at the moment. However, if I'm not sure about your situation, but CertPT can be done purely asynchronously. So that might be a better option at that time if that's suitable for you.
Yeah. and also the Trinity Teach English Online. If you know, if you, that's all asynchronous, you can go and do it at your own pace. And then even the assessments, if you wanted to get the certificate in online teaching, again, you know, you can do that all at your own pace when you want. So yeah, some ideas for maybe looking at the other specialist qualifications for your current situation and your current time.
I mean, sorry, Alison, I was going to say somebody, because I just saw that somebody else was asking a question. Do you have to have a Cert TESOL before you have a Cert PT? And the answer is not necessarily. So it depends whereabouts you are. So for example, I mentioned my experience in China. So a lot of the teachers that I worked with in China, they already have their teaching qualifications from the Chinese government. They've probably been working in China for a lot of years. In those cases, we would accept that previous experience for Cert PT, they didn't need to have Cert TESOL. So it's probably a good idea to talk to a provider and tell them about your experience, and if they'll accept you onto a course.
Yes, there were a few questions about that, and we'll maybe come back to that as well, because a few people came from different angles about the same question, really. The next one is about the Tilek in the UK. We haven't run Tilek before in the UK. However, my understanding is there is a new provider coming on board in Wales. So I'm just going to pop my email address in there. That was an anonymous attendee. My email address is in the chat, and I'm happy if you just want to contact me about that, because I don't know if they've been if they're through the validation process yet, but I'll try and help you with the Tilek. Okay. I think the next question is regarding the Cert OT or the Trinity Teach English Online. I'm not sure. Does he mean that it can be taught on this online course and then take a level certificate? I'm assuming that this is what you're referring to. So the Trinity Teach English Online is an asynchronous course. It's a course that you do at your own pace. You can actually purchase it in units or modules. So you can kind of do a little bit by bit. And then you can, if you decide that you want a regulated qualification at the end, you can do the certificate in online teaching. So that is, you've got the course itself that you can do at your own pace, and then you do the 4 assessments after to get the qualification. They are not interdependent on one another, but if you buy it all at one time, it's actually cheaper. So if you think you want a regulated qualification at the end, we might recommend buying it that way. If you just want to sort of do it in little bits, then buy a unit or a module and try it out. But that is something that is run by Trinity. You can do at your own pace and get your qualification at the end for online teaching. I hope that I answered that correctly. Someone is asking about the costs. Again, Trinity, we oversee and we moderate the courses. So each individual provider for all the different qualifications.
Hi, Alison, you still there?
If you want to study online, or if you want to do a blended, or if you want to do face-to-face, you will need to inquire with the different providers to find out what their course fees are. And all of that information can be found on the find a course page. So if you go to Cert TESOL, find a course, and then you'll see there are online providers and face-to-face providers, and you can inquire directly with each of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next one's kind of a tricky one. Simon, I'll maybe get your help on this. I'm currently studying for the ATCL teaching diploma in speech and drama. I've been teaching English for 2 years. Should I start with a Cert TESOL? What's your feeling on that?
Okay, so I suppose I should put my employer recruiter hat on for this to say, I guess it depends whereabouts you are and what the requirements for the particular employer might be. So because it's already a teaching diploma, some schools might recognize that diploma, but the problem there is that there's no English language teaching qualification. So my guess would be to say you may have to have a certificate in English language teaching, the Cert TESOL, as well. But as an employer, I would be delighted if somebody with a diploma in speech and drama and a certificate in TESOL came along. That could be really, really interesting in terms of recruitment. So so kind of good and bad there. Maybe you need that Cert TESOL or something else, but you're probably going to be quite a good candidate.
Brilliant. Okay, somebody's asking about job opportunities for online teachers. I think the recommendations that you gave at the end there, that's probably your best starting point, is, you know, filtering out who's looking for online teaching and who's looking for teachers in country and face-to-face. So, okay, another interesting one. How does the Cert TESOL compare to a PGCE for early career teachers looking to enter the teaching profession? Do we need both?
Well, so this is this is a more of a kind of a question I come across quite often. So I guess the answer is it depends on where you're planning to teach. So if you're planning to go abroad, for example, and working in international school, for example, then they're probably going to be more interested in your PGCE. But as I mentioned earlier on, do you remember I was talking about those different kind of like the different levels? 5, 6, 7, for example. Well, a PGCE is in the UK is normally considered a postgraduate qualification. It comes in at around level 7. So if we're looking for comparisons, it's the diploma in TESOL that would be comparative with a PGCE. So in answer to your question, once again, it's kind of like if you're going to get the best jobs in the widest number of places, it would be great if you had a PGCE and a diploma in TESOL at some point. Cert TESOL also is really useful if you're going to work in a foreign country, in the sense that a lot of international schools now have what we would call an EAL component, so an English as an additional language. So, for example, I don't know about what your subject is, Jeannie, but say, for example, you're a mathematics teacher and that's what your PGCE is in, then it would be very useful in an international school environment to have something like Cert TESOL as well, because it makes you much more aware of the English language needs of your international cohort of students. So it's another one of those answers. It depends on the situation, but the more training you have, the better.
Brilliant. That was helpful. Hopefully, Jeannie, that was helpful to you. We've had a few questions kind of around this. People with very high level qualifications, you know, maybe in English literature or English language in their home country, even MA, PhD level. There's a few questions in there like that. And they're really kind of asking, you know, is the Cert TESOL for me? What should I be thinking of if I want to kind of maybe go into a more practical teaching setting? I guess that's the first question, right? Is what do you want to do with it? I don't know if you have any comments on that, Simon.
I mean, this is something that we come across quite often as trainers. And of course, your PhD or even a master's degree for that matter, it's designed for a certain purpose. And it's not necessarily designed for the practical classroom teaching that you might need. That's what Cert TESOL is designed for. So I would say that on the whole, if you are planning to go into a classroom and teach English to a group of students, and you don't have something like Cert TESOL, even if you've got a PhD, it's still useful. And probably most employers will still require it. I mean, the good news is that your PhD could become more useful as you go through your career, because you've already got that background in research, for example. So yeah, I would say very often, even if you have very high level qualifications, you probably still need a Cert TESOL for the practical aspects.
Right, okay. I'm conscious of time, so I might just do one or two more here. I think some of the questions were actually quite similar in terms of the level of qualification and moving into that more practical sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a few questions have come up around the CertPT. You know, the CertPT, it's either you have an initial qualification with a bit of experience, or you have quite a substantial amount of teaching experience. Those are sort of the general entry requirements. So, you know, do keep that in mind when looking at the CertPT and comparing what you want to do. You know, whether you want to specialize or whether you want to go into more general, you know, practice for teaching. Cert TESOL is it TEFL Q? No, it's TEFL I. So the DIP TESOL is TEFL Q, and Cert TESOL is TEFL I. Okay. I'll just maybe take one more here. Okay, we'll take this one because I want to be clear of the roles of Trinity and Cambridge. So I have the CELTA qualification as well as an IELTS Master Trainer certification.
Mm-hmm.
So they're asking, would another TESOL qualification be required or advantageous? I just wanted to point out the equivalence of the TEFL I and TEFL Q. Maybe I'll let you answer that, Simon.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. So that's one of the reasons why we use this idea of TEFL I and TEFL Q, and I mentioned that before, and Alison's just said it as well. So TEFL I is this idea of an initial qualification, maybe at the start of a career, and Cert TESOL and Cambridge's CELTA are the two most famous, recognized qualifications in the world, and they are equivalent. They are about the same in terms of usefulness for applying for a job. So if you've already got CELTA, no, you don't need to take Cert TESOL. However, you may be thinking about the next stage in your career, in which case that would be TEFL Q, and that would be DIP TESOL or Cambridge Delta.
Brilliant. And I think following the success of this session, we will probably do another on the higher level qualifications, focusing on the diploma as well. So I'm going to end there because I'm conscious that we've gone over time, but I hope we did get to quite a number of the questions today. Some of them are quite similar, but I hope everybody's got the information that they need. If you are interested in working with Trinity as a validated course provider to offer these qualifications, please do get in touch with us. I did put the email in the chat, international@trinitycollege.com. Depending on where you are in the world, we will connect you with the right team to help you in that kind of initial inquiry. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Simon, for doing a great presentation. And a reminder that we'll send you a recording so you can watch it all again. And we know we had people who signed up who couldn't join us in the end today, so they'll get a recording too. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for taking time out of their day to join us. And again, get in touch with us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.